Alright guys, we're going to do a little part 2 action. Now this book, hopefully you have a hard copy. We're going to start part 2. It's on page 11, but as you can see there aren't really chapters. So the way that I'm going to tell you is by pages. So today I'm going to try to read 11 to 21. So that would be like 2 chapters, and you'll see. And part 2 ends at page 142, at the very end of the book. And then you just have part 3 and it finishes. So it doesn't have chapter titles or headings, so I'm just going to go by page number. So this is the beginning of part 2, page 11. Classes and Monument ended on the last Friday of June for the summer vacation, but Jason Durant regarded today, Monday, as the first real day of vacation. The weekend just passed didn't count because he never went to school on weekends anyway. He had intended to sleep late this morning, but his eyes flew open as if the alarm clock had rung. The digital clock said 6:32, and Jason smiled, stretching luxuriously, thinking of the lazy summer days that lay ahead. Not exactly lazy summer day. Summer day camp started next week, but no more classes and no more homework for the next 2 months. Actually, he'd had a pretty good year at Monument Middle School. He had managed for the very first time to sneak onto the honor roll for the second marking period, although he figured that was due to luck rather than to brain power. He was glad that the 7th grade was behind him, and he hoped 8th grade would be easier. He had a feeling that it wouldn't be, though. He always had to work hard for his grades, and other kids seemed to fly through the terms with good marks on tests, answering questions in class, their hands waving eagerly at the teacher. But Jason was shy about offering answers, even when he knew them. He didn't like to be the center of attention. He'd feel the heat of his blood beating in his cheeks and his heart racing dangerously. Anyway, school was not on his schedule for the next 2 months. He sighed, stretched his legs again, and threw off the thin blanket. He knew that summer camp would be no picnic either, but at least there wouldn't be any classrooms or written tests, and he could make a fresh start with new kids. Leave the old kids behind, especially those who made his life miserable. Not that they were cruel or mean or made him the object of pranks or tortured him or anything like that. Mostly, they ignored him. He was rarely asked to join in their games or activities. He usually sat alone in the cafeteria and felt alone even when others were at the table. The other students seldom talked to him or asked him his opinion about anything. When they did encounter him in situations where he couldn't be avoided, they addressed him in an absent-minded way and didn't seem interested in what he had to say, and quickly turned their attention elsewhere. He liked the company of younger kids. They paid attention to him, listened to him, laughed at his jokes. He got along great with his sister Emma, who was 8 and liked to follow him around. At recess, he'd sometimes wander over to the other side of the schoolyard and watch the 2nd and 3rd graders playing their games. He got a kick out of them, the way they acted so serious, like miniature grown-ups. He'd push them on their swings. He'd seek out Emma, who was always glad to see him. He knew that Emma was smarter than he was. She read 2 or 3 books a week, while Jason had to struggle to get through a book, like Stephen King's new one, even though he was enjoying it. Emma was a great writer, too. She'd won an essay contest last year. Ooh, Stephen King's Pet Sematary. You won't. The essay, which she titled Rights and Wrongs, was about the celebrations of holidays and how they had changed through the years. She explained the title was to him how rights was a play on the word rights, what she called a pun. What he liked about Emma was that she didn't explain things in a way that made him feel stupid, as if she was sharing knowledge with him and making him feel worthy of that sharing. He got out of bed, heard the sound of the shower from the bathroom next to his bedroom, His mother was an early riser and could not function in the morning until, 1, she drank a cup of black Honduran coffee, and 2, she had a shower. Emma, too, was an early riser, but she would read in bed for an hour or two. And his dad was away on a business trip to Lincoln, Nebraska, and he would be home in 3 days. His father was a fanatic about football and had season tickets to the New England Patriots game. Miami Dolphins, thank you. Jason went with him sometimes, but could not get excited about 22 men knocking each other around on a football field. He liked to be with his father, though, and pretended that he liked the game. He always had to act real sad and upset when the Patriots lost, and his father went into what his mother called a blue funk when the Patriots were defeated. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Jason contemplated the day that lay ahead. He would accompany his mother to the Y as her guest in the morning and do some swimming in the free swim period while she went through her exercises on the machines. Home for lunch, and he'd be free for the afternoon while his mother did her volunteer work at Monument Hospital. Emma would be spending the day at Kim's Cambridge's house. Kim's family had a swimming pool, and Emma had invited Jason to tag along, but he was looking forward to a free afternoon when he could do anything he pleased. Goof around, maybe take a bike ride, watch television, or finish the Stephen King book. Brad Bartlett had invited him for a dip into his swimming pool in the afternoon, but Jason knew that he had been invited simply because their mothers served on a lot of committees together. Brad liked to play practical jokes, and you could never trust what he was going to do. Jason liked his kid sister, Alicia. She was a whiz at jigsaw puzzles, and he liked to watch the picture emerge as she set the pieces in place. So maybe he might drop in to see her later today, but wouldn't bring his swimming trunks. Anyway, the day loomed ahead. Free. No classes. No demands. Not even any household chores that he knew about. And he lay there feasting on the thought of the long summer days ahead. And now we go to the next, what would be a chapter. And that'll be page 17. The body of the 7-year-old Alicia Bartlett was found between the trunks of 2 overlapping maple trees in dense woods, only 500 yards from her home. She was covered with an accumulation of leaves, branches, debris, which was one of the reasons her body had not been discovered during the first search of the area. Whoever killed her had apparently laid her down with tenderness, folded her arms across her chest, pulled her dress down primly to her knees, and carefully arranged her long black hair to frame her face. But the killer could not erase the expression frozen in her eyes, horror and surprise, and had not bothered to close those stricken eyes. Her body was discovered at dusk during the second search of the area by a volunteer who spotted a small white sandal sticking out of a pile of debris. Authorities reasoned that an animal had perhaps disturbed her covering, exposed the sandal sometime between the first and second searches. The medical examiner listed the preliminary cause of death as head trauma from an irregularly shaped blunt instrument. Alicia had been struck in the temple with a single blow, and death was probably instantaneous. The weapon was not found. She had not been raped or sexually molested. There was a minimum of blood in the area of the wound. The child had not resisted her attacker since there was no defensive evidence, such as blood or bits of flesh under the fingernails. Time of death was placed at approximately 5 p.m., less than an hour after her disappearance. Alicia had at last been seen on the patio of her home by 12-year-old Jason Durant, who lived in her neighborhood, about 4 o'clock on the afternoon of June 29th. She had neither wandered off or been lured away a few minutes before her mother arrived home from a shopping trip at 4:10 p.m. Alicia Bartlett was small for her age, fragile, intelligent, friendly and outgoing, although her mother said she was timid with strangers and certainly would not have gone off with someone she did not know. She was an utterly feminine child, which was the reason she was wearing a dress on one of the hottest days of early summer, refusing to put on the shorts and brief halter her mother had suggested. The dress, a green sleeveless one, was probably just as cool as any other outfit her mother had decided. Alicia lived with her parents, Norma and Laura Bartlett, and her 19-year-old brother, Brad, in a section of Monument, Massachusetts, known as Cobb's Creek, named for the brook that meandered along the edges of the neighborhood. Searchers had at first concentrated on the brook, even though its depth was seldom more than a foot in most places, and it would be dried up in spots by midsummer. Still, it was feared that Alicia might have stumbled and fallen into the stream, struck her head on a rock, lost consciousness, and drowned. The focus on the brook was another reason that her body had been overlooked in the early stages of the search. Detective Lieutenant George Braxton was in charge of the investigation. On the evening of that first day, Senator Harold Gibbons arrived at police headquarters. Although Braxton greeted him cordially, the senator's grandson had been a classmate of the 7-year-old victim. He felt that the senator was an unnecessary distraction and an annoyance. Braxton had a lot of things to be annoyed about. At 47 years of age, he was an insomniac with an inability to relax, whether in bed or in his office. He both loved and hated his job. He loved it because he had a sense of doing good, using his wits to put lawbreakers in jail, although he never put those feelings into words, knowing how corny they sounded. He hated it because of cases like this one. No clues, no leads, no physical evidence. The presence of the media and the intrusion of Senator Gibbons cast a further spotlight on a case that was already too public, too open to scrutiny. The final irritation was the presence of District Attorney Alvin Dark, who had taken up residence in Braxton's office and Braxton knew was waiting to take over the investigation if something definite wasn't done in the next 24 hours. Braxton spent the night in his office getting nowhere. As dawn arrived, the detective lifted a slat of the Venetian blind, opened the window, and stared dismally at the bleak, sunless streets, the oppressive clouds hovering over the downtown buildings. He could feel, even at this early hour, heat rising from the pavement. Like an invisible soot he could almost taste. He had not slept for 24 hours. He had no clues, no leads, no evidence. He did have a possible suspect, depending on the result of an interview he planned to conduct later this morning. And there goes page 21, so we'll stop there and wait for the next one. Suspense.